So what I'll be presenting today is actually a blog post. We've been doing a series of blog posts on very simple, we call it simple data compared to what we often end up looking at, which is mixed data. And what I think is truly innovative about sort of this case study that I'm showing you is the fact that any of you could do this. It's a multinational global study with lots of respondents, lots of insights on a complicated subject, and any of you could do it very easily, quickly, and cheaply without leaving your desk. So that said, as I was putting these slides together, I took a call with a client, and the client said, you know, Tom, we don't have room for an open end in our tracking survey. It's already too long. And I think about more or less 25% of market researchers have this weird relationship where they're scared of unstructured data. And I think I'm going to come back to this. I'm not going to judge you one way or the other, but I want you to consider this comment again at the end of this presentation. So what I'm going to be going over today with you is, again, what we learned from just a single question. And we'll be looking at over 15,000 completes. Lost it there. There we go. And so it's something cheap because it's just one question. This only took $1,500 to field. It's something that's fast. You don't need a PhD in linguistics to do this. Any of you can do this with an hour-and-a-half training in under 2 hours. That's how long this analysis took. And I will be reminding you again and again that this is just from one single question, uno ein question. Because we used machine translation. I know the last speaker mentioned translation, waiting for translation. That's not an issue here. So what do we investigate? We wanted to understand about American culture. What is American culture? And beyond that, I mean, what is culture in general? And how do you best understand American culture, comparing it to other cultures? And so what do you need before you can do a text analysis? You need at least two small things. You will need a question. This is our question. How would you explain your culture to someone who isn't familiar with it? And that was, of course, asked in 10 different countries in their native languages, up in Canada, French, and English. And, you know, I think the importance of a good question is lost a lot in market research these days. We're supposed to be the best at asking questions. And yet, we get lazy, and we ask 15, 30 minutes worth of Likert scale batteries that no normal person will answer. And that affects our data. And how, I want you to think about how you would construct a survey when we're looking at this data that could get the same insights. The second thing, of course, is the data. We're going to need to field this. This was fielded, just so you know, through Google Consumer Surveys. It's 10 cents per complete. They give you the demographics free. It's nice when you can be nimble like that, and that gives room for iteration. 8 languages. The nice thing here is we used machine translation. Even if you're Procter & Gamble and you have all the money and resources in the world for a project, there's probably a small chance that you're going to have an analyst who speaks Japanese, Portuguese, German, Spanish, and so on. So this was, here you see, this is just one small little screenshot from one little window in OpenText, the only thing I'll show from this software. But on the right is the exact same data in French as on the left, machine translated, 2 seconds, instant, pretty much, and free. The point being here, some of you will naturally wonder, what kind of nuance will be lost? So I have different answers to that question. The answer is not much. Let's say you have a client who has a gas station, and some respondents say, I drove my Mercedes in, had an oil change, it was awful. 3 things of importance there. Mercedes, oil change, awful. That will not be missed by any translation software. So moving on, we're just 2 seconds into the analysis. We've translated over 15,000 comments into English. And now we need to very quickly move on to the analysis. The first step is, most of you would call it coding. We call it topic or feature identification. In this case, we teach and advocate this approach we call top-down, bottom-up. Everybody knows top-down. It's a priori. If you think something's in the data, we let you look for it and create a feature. The more important part is the data-driven, the bottom-up approach, where software, doesn't have to be our software, any text analytics software will have some way of identifying features, topics. How you do that? A lot of people will be using the term artificial intelligence, machine learning, and throw that at you and think that suffices. Of course, it means nothing, that word by itself. The important thing is, on one hand, you have human translation or very complex, long-time setups to identify these topics. On the other hand, you have IBM Watson, Azure, and other things who are just using automatic features. This approach takes too long and is not quite as good as you think. This approach is very fast, but doesn't give you much to work with. So what you need to do is mix the human and the machine as efficiently as possible. This is arguably the longest step in this analysis, about 45 minutes or so. 160 topics, attributes, features, if you want to call it that, all of which are important in some way to at least one of those 10 countries in this, or 11 cultures in this data set. I'll be looking more at the top sort of 25 for some of these. And we're going to look, obviously this is a more methodological presentation, but I want to delve into the data a little bit with you as well. But imagine if you had 160 important features. How many attributes would you have had to create? And would you have thought of all of them in a survey? It would be an impossibility, of course. But these are from the customers, the respondents' own words. So a lot of people, ironically, when they're doing text analysis the first time, some of them get lost, blinded by the lights and the trees, and they don't approach it the same way that they would a structured analysis, yet you should. When you do a structured data analysis, you think about your objectives, testing your hypotheses. A quick way to start a text analysis is visualization. I'm not talking about the Wordle.nets, which really don't mean anything. So here we have 10 countries visualized based on how similar or different they are across those 160 features, as well as the 8 major emotions. So now we visualize this in just literally less than a minute, and we're looking at this and we're thinking, okay, USA is sort of clustered right there in the middle with a bunch of countries around it. What does that mean? Is everybody becoming like the USA? Is culture converging? That's now a hypothesis that I may want to look into or test. Over in the bottom left, I see Germany and Japan, 2 countries that are extremely different geographically, linguistically, culturally, yet they look similar there. Why is that? That's another thing I want to look into. Obviously, there's a few more interesting things here. I see Canada, both English and French, near each other. That's good, makes me feel good about the data, and that we're on the right track, but I may want to look into that vis-a-vis Australia and Mexico. Adding some dimensions to this chart, so there's 2 kinds of dimensions here. Joy, that you see up in the upper right hand next to Mexico there, that's an emotion. So that's not what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. So Mexico, it looks like Mexico and French Canada have more joy in their comments when they're asked this question about their culture. You see tradition up near Mexico there. Tradition, history, food, beauty means Mexico. Brazil also, to some degree, are talking more about these issues. Now, if you took that dimension joy and continued the line past where it ends, where it right there in the middle is sort of the average of joy, but if you continued it, you'd hit Germany and Japan. In other words, Germany and Japan have less joy in their comments. Why is that? Another thing for me to investigate in the analysis. So moving on, now that we have some objectives, just want to very quickly take 1 or 2 people in the front here maybe and ask them, well, first of all, thinking about how would you design this? What kind of questions would you ask if this had to be a structured, in the old days when this had to be a structured question? But beyond that, how would you answer that? How would you describe your culture? What do you think is going to be important? Or how would you say, what is American culture? Anyone?
Pride.
I'm sorry, pride, okay. Individualism. I'll take one more. Freedom. That's a good one. So, you know, we thought, what kind of attribute, if this was a survey, I probably would have said freedom, apple pie, red picket fences, rap music, and so forth. A lot of these things did not come up at all. Baseball, for instance. So here we had USA on just some of the topics. Towards the bottom in the long blue bar versus the international aggregate across the 10 countries in white, you'll see where USA over-indexes significantly higher than the average. So we see freedom, liberty is the number one there, actually, right? The second one, multiculturalism. I wasn't surprised to see that for the US per se. We're taught from an early age that we're the melting pot and so forth, right? But look at that white bar, how big that is for the other countries. That was a shock because technically culture is about individuality and uniqueness. And this has become, and this is probably part of the reason now that we saw that it's starting to cluster in the middle. Multiculturalism is a global phenomena. Where is it higher? Where is it lower? Several other things here we could go into. Towards less on top there, where US under-indexes significantly, welcoming, hospitable, relaxed, friendship, history, and so forth. Some of these you may agree with. Some not, perhaps. But these are the data. Beyond what people say explicitly, there's emotions, of course. And sentiment. A lot of, with text analytics, you hear a lot about sentiment. And US has high positive sentiment. Sentiment is overly simplistic. We hardly never use it, in fact. On the right, we have Plutchnik's major 8 emotions that all psychologists pretty much seem to agree on. This pattern will tell an analyst something very quickly, typically, if they're used to looking at it. Now, I would expect to see a lot of joy, commonly, and very little of other emotions. Unless it's a hospital or insurance company, you'd have a lot of sadness, maybe. Disgust usually only comes up in food categories, hotel bathrooms, politics recently. You'll see anger there. High for everyone, but especially for the United States, the blue. Also a lot of fear and anxiety. So now again, things that we want to look into further perhaps. And of course you can very easily drill down into the 16,000 or so comments here. I'm not going to have time to read to you all these examples, but I'll just read the bottom one because it's short. The expression of self in the most obnoxious form one can think of. Fat, dumb, and ugly, loud and obnoxious. Donald Trump, the ugly American. Disgust is being tagged there multiple times by the software. Not everybody sounded like this person, but I mean the one on top especially, the point was these were really well thought out responses to this question. This is again Google surveys. Google is putting that 1 or 2 questions between real people and real things they want to get to, like Wall Street Journal article, a video, a music, and so forth. So in terms of sample quality and so forth, that's less of a concern. And you can tell it by some of these responses. So moving on, I'll skip these. Let's look a little bit at Germany and Japan. It was very interesting to me. I studied Asian studies for a while and Chinese. And why are Japan and Germany so close? And let me go over to Germany. We'll look at that one that has a little bit less. So there was a couple of things. Multiculturalism was under-indexing for both of them. Very weird because Germany has one of the highest immigration levels in Europe. Japan, very insular culture still today. So why are neither country, I mean, it makes more sense maybe for Japan not to mention it, but both of them under-index, one of the similarities. There was less joy, as you saw. It seems, for different reasons, Germans and Japanese have a harder time talking and discussing their culture. In the case of Germany, I might hypothesize it's their historic background, World War II and so forth. In the case of Japan, I believe that they have, one of the reasons is that they don't have basis of comparison. So when they're asked how to describe their culture, they'll say things like, not sure, you can't explain Japanese culture, you need to experience it, and things like that. Beer, you see on the bottom, I mean alcohol, that's something other that they have in common. So two cultures with some similarities. And you can go deeper into this, of course. I want to leave a few minutes for questions, but just want to recap in terms of the overall findings, and we have this on our blog, we have an ebook, see myself or my colleague Tim Lynch. If you want us to email that to you, just give us your card. But the idea of multiculturalism was very interesting that came out of this. We did find over 28 charts created in this 2-hour period, all interesting. But that significant differences do endure, even though cultures are sort of looking also like they're becoming similar. We understand the dimensions of these cultures and why they matter. And the emotional analysis was also interesting, especially in the US. We saw sort of, no surprise with the politics going on. But we saw a lot of things like that in other countries too, leading us to different problems, political and crime and otherwise. So the beauty really is about analyzing over 15,000 rich comments this quickly across 8 countries, 10 languages in fewer than 2 hours. And so in terms of this conference, it's about innovation. Is it better? Could you do this? You couldn't really do this in this way with normal techniques. Is it faster? Certainly 3 days in field, 2 days in analysis. Is it cheaper? $1,500 for the fielding here. And so think about what you could do, what you could learn about your brand versus your competitors, your market, et cetera, with just one single question. And to come back to this comment, I hope I've convinced you that this is a bad way to think in 2017, and that oftentimes, or all of the time in my experience, the text questions are the richest. Thanks so much. I'll take questions.